you in welcoming our distinguished witnesses, and I want to thank them for their years of service. This past year has highlighted several growing challenges confronting both the Air Force and the Space Force. For example, Vladimir Putin's brutal and unprovoked war in Ukraine has demonstrated the significance of air and missile defense in denying the effective use of air power. Russia maintains a high level of capability in space, but Communist China is much further ahead in comparison. Meanwhile, the state of competition to use or deny the use of space capabilities is rapidly evolving. And Beijing rapidly continues to develop and field capabilities that could test our own assets in the air and in space. Although we face challenges, there are good signs of progress in this year's budget request. For example, I'm encouraged to see the Department of Air Force continue to modernize. In particular, the Air Force is finally building out its fleet of fighter aircraft at a rate much closer to what we need. It does so while continuing to develop the next generation of advanced fighters and bombers. I hope our witnesses will provide an update regarding plans for the next generation of tanker aircraft, considering that the KC-46 delivery is still in progress. I'm also glad to see adequate resourcing for programs such as the Sentinel B-21 and long-range standoff missile. However, there are alarming reports that indicate the ICBM replacement program could be delayed. We simply cannot afford to fall behind on nuclear modernization. So perhaps we'll talk about that. I commend the Space Force for the effort it has put into building a hybrid architecture for missile warning, secure communications, and resilient navigation. I hope our witnesses will identify steps Congress can take to improve space capabilities more rapidly. I'm concerned that the Air Force is still assuming risk in the near term, particularly in the air domain, particularly during the years of concern to operational commanders and the National Defense Strategy, Mr. Secretary. There remains a large gap between warfighting needs and capability. Many of the platforms Congress has supported continue to be delayed, including the F-35 Block 4 upgrades and T-7 trainer aircraft. This is particularly troubling since those delays indicate we may not have these assets to deploy them when we would need them the most. I'm also bothered by, excuse me, I want to have a ringtone here. I'm also bothered by potential failure to accelerate programs such as the E-7 command and control aircraft, despite the clear congressional signal of support last year. Other challenges stand in the way of agile combat employment. To make that a reality, we need to make progress in the electromagnetic spectrum, in munitions production, and in building out the posture of basing and logistics. Further delays in these programs could have disastrous consequences. The Air Force and Space Force have essential roles to play in deterring conflict in the Western Pacific. As I've said in other posture hearings, complacency is not an option. Complacency undermines deterrence. We need to proceed with urgency to get our forces the capabilities they need. So thank you for our witnesses, and I look forward to an important discussion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Wicker. And now let me recognize the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Reed.
Could you please pull that microphone as close as possible and ensure it's turned on?
How's that?
Better.
Yeah. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Wicker, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Department of the Air Force's FY24 budget submission. Approximately 1 year ago, I began my testimony before this committee with a quote from General Douglas MacArthur, reminding us that the history of failure in war can almost always be summed up in 2 words: too late. That warning is even more valid today. Over the past year, under the rubric of 7 Department of the Air Force operational imperatives, the Department of the Air Force has worked to define the capabilities and technologies we need, along with the programs and resources required to deter and, if necessary, prevail over our pacing challenge: China, China, China. In FY24, we are requesting approximately $5 billion as a direct result of this work and over $25 billion for operational imperative-related investments. War is not inevitable, but successfully deterring conflict is heavily dependent on our military capabilities. In our FY24 budget request, there are approximately 20 completely new or significantly rescoped program elements, some of which are classified, that we must develop, produce, and field if we desire to maintain the air and space superiority that America and our allies have counted on for decades. In order to proceed with any of these programs, the Department of the Air Force needs timely authorizations and appropriations. The Department of the Air Force is ready to move forward with the next generation of capabilities we need, and there is no time to lose. In addition to these new starts or enhanced efforts, the FY24 budget includes requests for additional resources to increase production and accelerate development of programs essential to the Department of the Air Force's missions, as defined in the National Defense Strategy. For the strategic triad, we have fully funded the Sentinel ICBM, the B-21 Raider bomber, the long-range standoff weapon, and our nuclear command and control programs. For the conventional force, we are increasing production of both the F-35 and the F-15EX. The Next Generation Air Dominance program is funded to move forward, and as indicated last year, an uncrewed collaborative combat aircraft program of record is fully funded in our FY24 request. We are also continuing the acquisition of sensor programs like the E-7 Wedgetail and the new Resilient Missile Warning and Tracking Space System. As we indicated last year, hard choices have been required to move the department into the future. We deeply appreciate the support of Congress for the divestitures we requested last year. This year, we must continue the divestment of our over 40-year-old A-10 Warthog. This program has served us well, but it is becoming increasingly obsolete and absorbing resources needed for higher priorities. We ask for Congress' continued support for this and other identified changes we must make to field the forces we need to be successful against our pacing and other challenges. But of course, it isn't all about the equipment we need to perform our missions. It's also about the men and women who serve in the total force, active, guard, reserve, and those who support them. We appreciate Congress' support for a 4.6% pay raise last year. This year, we are asking for a 5.2% pay increase, the largest one-year increase we have ever requested. In line with Secretary Austin's Taking Care of People initiative, we are continuing to invest in child development centers and housing to meet the highest priority needs of our airmen, guardians, and their families. Like the other services, with the exception of the Space Force, the Air Force faces challenges in recruiting in a generation where the propensity to serve is the lowest that we've seen in decades. We are removing barriers to service to ensure that anyone with the capability and desire can serve to their full potential. Under the National Defense Strategy, we are also strengthening teams, both in the Joint Force and with our allies and partners. Building these relationships and investing in our ability to work together is the essence of integrated deterrence. The effectiveness and importance of these relationships are on display in Europe today, where NATO is stronger than ever. I recently returned from the Pacific, where I met